Hello guys, welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast. I am back today doing a solo episode. I think I did a solo episode last week where we spoke all about the common mistakes I see with girls going into a muscle gaining phase. And obviously if that appeals to you doing the muscle gaining phase, go back and listen to that one. I feel like we have smashed the muscle gain chat for the last 5 or 6 weeks and kind of intentionally, obviously, well, if you're an OG listener or a regular listener, you will know I am right in the thick of my own personal muscle gaining phase, and we are also about to start the muscle gain phase in Eat Like Ruby. So it makes a lot of sense that we've obviously been talking about that over recent weeks and really just trying to inform people what that is, why we do it, how I'm personally doing it, how we're setting it up for the girls in Eat Like Ruby, all of those things. I just really want to educate and bring awareness to that other element of nutrition and training. I think we speak so much about fat loss and we just hear so much fat loss chat everywhere, but the muscle gain phase is obviously a little bit different. And I really wanted to, like I said, just bring awareness and educate on that a little bit more. But I feel like we've kind of done it. I literally said to G, I was like, we can't do another muscle gain chat today. We've got to mix it up. And I am going to kind of mix it up and do a bit of a 180 and do a little bit more fat loss chat, which is a little bit random for me this time of year. If you've been in Eat Like Ruby for a long time, or if you've been following Eat Like Ruby for a long time, you'll know that I'm a very big fan of the phases and focusing on different things at different times of the year. Usually we look at a little bit of fat loss coming into the new year. That can be really common for people after the holidays. Then it's super common for us to go hard on the muscle gain and like the come out of a deficit kind of chat as we come into winter and away from summer. And then usually we get back on the fat loss train on the other side of winter. So like I said, it's kind of random to bring up the fat loss chat now, but I am actually going to like almost correct myself and kind of call myself out for something. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more. For me personally, and for the real, like the gym girls that I work with, the somewhat like experienced or advanced girls, that structure that I said before of possibly a mini cut at the start of the year, big time out of a deficit in the middle of the year, and then a fat loss phase towards the end. That works really well, and that's really common, and that's really awesome. When we're in a healthy weight range, when we understand all of this stuff, when we've got big body composition goals, probably big performance and gym goals as well, it makes sense to really tee up the whole year to prioritize different things at different times and really optimize each goal in each phase and give each goal in each phase the time and attention that it needs. But the one thing I'm going to, like I said, call myself out and correct myself on is I will often say a fat loss phase should be very short, sharp, direct, and effective. And someone literally said to me, what if I have 40 kilos to lose? And I was like, fuck, that is such a good point, because obviously if we think about somebody working on losing 40 kilos, and shout out to this person, they might know who they are, they might not, they're in the current Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase. They have been killing it and chipping away at that weight loss goal really, really well. But it just really kind of brought to my attention. I mean, obviously I've worked with people on these goals for like over a decade now, which is awesome. But it really just kind of brought to my attention the fact that we have so many people in Eat Like Ruby, but also just in general, in so many different places and with different goals at different levels, at different phases. So I think me just sitting here saying, we should focus on this, and then we should focus on this, and then we should focus on this, can be really beneficial and a really good structure for some people, but maybe not for others. And that's kind of what I wanted to speak about today, is the different plans or the different structure I would put in place depending on where you're at. So like I said, what I'm calling myself out on is that comment of fat loss should be very short, sharp, direct, and effective. I think if you're someone who, like I said, can relate to being pretty experienced, pretty advanced, you're a gym girl, you're in a healthy weight range, and you do really intentional fat loss phases, pretty much like myself. If we think about myself, I'll usually pick a few months of the year where I go pretty hard, pretty direct on fat loss, and then the rest of the time I'm out of a deficit. If you can relate to that, that is where I think a fat loss phase should be very short, sharp, direct, effective, all those things I keep saying. If you're someone, like I said, who has potentially like 10, 20, 30, 40 kilos to lose, like a few people have asked me, obviously that's not something we want to do really short, sharp, and directly, because it's going to take a fair bit longer than someone who has, say, like 5 to 10 kilos to lose. So what I thought I'd do today is break this down a little bit more and give a bit more direct advice depending on where people are at. And if you're in the current round of the fat loss phase, the girls who started in January, we actually did a specific call on this probably maybe 4 to 5 weeks ago by the time this podcast comes out. And basically what I did for the girls in the fat loss phase, I did a call where I was just like, this is what I would do if I had more than 10 kilos to lose. This is what I'd advise if you've got less than 10 kilos to lose. And this is what I would do if you're at a point where you're ready to maintain. And I just thought that was really beneficial. And the call actually resonated really well with the girls because obviously our advice and our plans are going to be a little bit different if someone does have 30 kilos to lose versus somebody having 3 kilos to lose. And we know that in order to achieve fat loss, the science and therefore the protocols and everything will be the same. Like we need the deficit in place, but the long-term plans for those people are going to be quite different when we think about how different those goals are. So if you're in the fat loss phase at the moment, you've probably heard a fair bit of this. We do have the next round of the fat loss phase starting literally, I think, not next week, the week after, April 22nd. And that's even something I'll speak about for a second as well, because if you're a regular listener, you'll probably remember that a few weeks ago I said we are running the muscle gain phase, which we definitely are. That's starting at the same time. And then we're going to run the fat loss phase on the other side of it. And we were going to have a break from running the fat loss phase through winter. And again, I just kind of clocked that with myself. And I was just like, that's because I have a break from fat loss in the winter. And then the more I started to think about this and think about those girls who have the goal of wanting to achieve bigger fat loss, obviously they're not going to follow that same structure that I am or that someone else might. And so when we had that initial plan to not run the fat loss phase through winter and eat like Ruby, first of all, I had so many of the current girls like, oh my God, I really want to do it again. And you're not going to run it again for ages. And they just felt like they were kind of left hanging. And we also had the wait list up for what we were planning to be the next round in August. And literally within like 2 weeks in February, it had about 60 names on it. And then I just, again, clocked with myself that this is obviously a big thing people like to focus on and want to learn about and want to work towards. I don't want to make people wait 8 months to do so. So it just kind of was a good reflection for me to clock. Like I said, I've worked with so many different people and different goals for so long, but really just remembering that everyone is in such a different position and wanting to work on different things at different times. And I want to have as much of that available in Eat Like Ruby at all times as we can. Like I said, I don't want people literally waiting 8 months to achieve their goals. If I'm like, fuck, we've got all the resources, I've got the program, let's actually go right now instead of going in 6 or 7 months time. Like it just didn't even make sense. So we are running the fat loss phase in Eat Like Ruby starting April 22nd. We're also running the muscle gain phase starting April 22nd. Obviously 2 completely different programs when we think about what the people want to work towards. But the real common theme in Eat Like Ruby is you want to get education on nutrition and training. You want to up level or elevate your nutrition and training. You want the right vibe, the right community. You want the directness from me to just give you all the facts on how to do so. You want to be in the room with the girls that are doing the same thing as you so you can ask questions, get support, get feedback, get everything you need to work towards that goal with a bunch of girls that are doing the same thing. And that is literally what Eat Like Ruby is, regardless of whether we're doing it over here with a fat loss goal or we're doing it over here with a muscle gain goal. And so I'm going to give, like I said, a bit of advice and a bit of structure today for these different goals. And then obviously, like always, if you're picking up what I'm putting down and you think, yep, I've got that goal, I want to work with Rubes on it, then you want to get in one of these programs. What I like to be mindful of, guys, is so many people listen to the podcast and they love it and I love it and we're here for it all the time. But then we also obviously run the programs and we want to give those girls a bit extra. We want to give them even more resources, even more education, even more information. So today I'm going to do a bit of a summary of that call that the girls in the fat loss phase got. Like I said, if you've listened to that call, if you're in the fat loss phase, this will be a little bit of repetition and deja vu. But even as a side note in that, I think it's so beneficial to hear things multiple times and actually really take it all in and let it settle in. So if you feel like you've heard this before, my current fat loss phase girls, I'd still listen to this. if you hear it and then you think, yep, I want more, I want to put myself in the room, I want to do the thing with all the girls with Rubes, we've got both of those programs starting in a couple of weeks. Let's actually go fat loss or muscle gain style. But let's get into what I actually want to talk about today, because we've been here for 10 minutes and she has not even started yet. So the first thing I want to talk about, or the first sort of group I want to speak to, and I said this to the girls on the Fat Loss Phase call, if you hear the first topic or the first group that I'm going to speak to and you think, oh, that's not me, I would still listen, because A, it could be you at some point, or B, there's always so much crossover. Just because we're giving advice for a particular group, there's still going to be little things I say that are probably relatable to people who are outside of that group, and vice versa. So I would just settle in and listen like you do with every episode. But the first group I want to speak to, or the first position I want to speak to, is people who need to lose more than 10 kilos to be in a healthy weight range. And it's super important to clock the word there, need. Not people who want to lose more than 10 kilos, but people who need to lose more than 10 kilos to be in a healthy weight range. Because I think what can happen there is, if you're someone who's like around the low 60s, for example, you might be like 61 or 62 kilos. And quite often I see people in that position who are like, my goal is to be 50 kilos, which is super tiny and kind of crazy. But what I want to point out there is, you do not need to lose more than 10 kilos to be in a healthy weight range. You might want to, or you might have something going on there where you think that's what you want to work towards. And hopefully by the time you listen to this whole episode, maybe that changes a little bit. But really just clocking that this first category is people who need to lose more than 10 kilos to be in a healthy weight range. If this is you, this is where I would disregard that comment of a fat loss phase needing to be very short, sharp, and direct. Because like I was saying before, if we think about a person needing to lose more than 10 kilos to be in a healthy weight range, that's obviously, this could be anything from 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 kilos. If you're up around those numbers, we don't want to try and rush that and do it as quickly as we can and do it as aggressive as we can, because we don't need to. Obviously, there's a fair bit to lose, meaning we're going to sit in that phase for a while. So my number one piece of advice to these people is to find a sustainable deficit that you can settle into and enjoy for the most part until you reach a healthy weight range. And really, we really want to break that down and think about that. Settle into a sustainable deficit that is enjoyable for the most part, and sit there and sit in that until you reach a healthy weight range. It's so common when we do have a bigger goal to think, oh my God, I need to find something like crazy, quick fix, like intense to get that off as quick as we can. This is such a common place where we see people do something really crazy and really intense, whether it's like fasting, juice diet, super restrictive diet, whatever, drop big numbers, realize that it's not sustainable, put those big numbers back on. Go for something intense again, drop big numbers, realize it's not sustainable, put them back on. And so really clocking that line there of find a sustainable deficit that's enjoyable for the most part. If I think about Eat Like Ruby and the girls in the fat loss phase, or the girls that have been in Eat Like Ruby before that do have a bigger weight loss goal, the number one thing that I love to see, and I reckon so many of you can relate to this, is really finding that sustainable deficit where for the most part, you're really enjoying your foods, you're enjoying your meals, it's actually really working for you, and you're able to truly settle in and just make this your lifestyle for a while. Because if we think about somebody, let's just say, for example, we're trying to lose 20 kilos in this position, and it can be more, it can be less, whatever, but this will be our example. If we think about the rate of loss for this person, we might have a week where we drop a kilo, and then we might have a week where we drop 400 grams, and then 800 grams, and then a week where we drop nothing, and then a week where we drop a kilo again. And it's always going to fluctuate and be a little bit up and down. But if we step back and look across a month, we might lose like 3 to 4 kilos a month. If we think about someone wanting to drop 20 or 30 kilos, we're looking at spending most of the year pursuing that goal. If we think about 3 to 4 kilos a month, we're trying to lose 20 to 30, that's going to take a fair few months, pretty much the whole year, to really work towards that. And I don't want to put numbers and targets in place like that. Like, okay, well, by the end of the year, you'll drop 20 kilos. That's not what I'm getting at. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is considering the fact that you do have a fairly big goal. You want to work towards it in a sustainable, enjoyable way. It is going to happen at a moderate rate. So you want to piece all that together and think, okay, I want to be able to set up my diet and set up my nutrition in a way that's very enjoyable and that I can stick to most days, most weeks, most months, so that when I look at 2024 as a whole, or whatever time you listen to this podcast, you can really just actually settle into that and chip away at that goal while it's still working alongside the rest of your life. If we think about those really like strict, intense things people can do to try and lose weight, usually there's a very big disconnect with doing that thing and living the rest of your life. They don't normally go hand in hand. If you're doing something like a juice cleanse or fasting or super low-cal diet, it can be very hard to make that work with the rest of your life. And then, like I said, we fall off track. We can't stick to it. Nothing's sustainable. We know the thing. We've spoken about this so many times, but really this is where we want to look and go, okay, I'm going to spend most of my year, maybe even some of next year pursuing this thing. How do I set this up in a way that really works for me in my life in terms of just easy meals, easy food prep, easy to stick to. I'm going to look forward to it for the most part and all of those things. If this is going to be my life for the next year, give or take, I need it to actually work for me and work with me. And the other little thing that applies to the girls in this position, and I said this to the girls in the fat loss phase, is you want to set up that sustainable, enjoyable deficit and then factor in diet breaks when needed. And if you don't know what a diet break is or how to do it or when to do it and all of those things, then you want to join Eat Like Ruby. And the other thing for these people to think about is possibly recalculate nutrition targets. I usually say like roughly every 5 to 10 kilos lost. This is going to be different from person to person. And all of my Eat Like Ruby girls will know, like, one of my most favorite quotes is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you found your deficit and things are working and you're chipping away and everything's moving in the direction that you want to go, literally, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you feel like you find that sweet spot and everything is moving and then you hit a plateau and you hit an actual plateau with weight measurements, peaks, everything, not just 1 week or a few days where the scale doesn't move, but really making an intelligent assessment and seeing that there is a clear plateau happening over time, then that's when we would just look at recalculating and assessing current targets. Because if we think about the fact that targets are based on our body weight, if you're someone with a 30 kilo weight loss goal, if you maybe get to the point where you've dropped like 8 to 10 of those kilos, obviously your body weight and your body size is a fair bit different now compared to when you started. So it can make sense that the targets need to be a little bit different. This is going to be different for everybody because with that, activity levels can sometimes change. Like, so many things can change along the way that will affect targets. So we can't just say, yes, your targets will definitely change as your body does, but it's just worth being mindful of that. If you're assessing and you really can see a clear plateau happening, it might just be worth making that recalculation for these people. But that is pretty much a summary of my advice and the structure I'd put in place for a person who needs to lose more than 10 kilos to reach a healthy weight range. Obviously, if this is you, and like I said, you pick up what I'm putting down, the Fat Loss Phase starts on April 22nd. We would love to have you. It is the most perfect place to really learn all of this stuff and start to put it into place. We literally get girls in the Fat Loss Phase that want to lose 2 kilos, and then we have girls that literally want to lose 50 kilos. So there's no criteria, there's no right or wrong with this. So long as you've got the right attitude, you want to get in there, you want to get after it, you want to learn, you want to actually put in the work. So it's absolutely the perfect place if you are in this position. But the next category or position I want to speak to is the girls who have a goal of losing less than 10 kilos or in a position where there's less than 10 kilos to lose. This is where that comment that I always make about fat loss phases being short, sharp, direct, effective, all those things factors in a little bit more. Because if somebody has less than 10 kilos to lose, this is where, if we think about myself, usually if I go into a fat loss phase, I'm probably looking around that 5 to 10 kilo mark, give or take, depending how hard I've gone on the gains. But this is usually where I fall. And if we think about what I've spoken about so many times on the podcast with my own fat loss phases, usually they're about 8 to 16 weeks, give or take. I usually look around like July to September to October-ish. And really, if we think about a person in this position, the starting weight and really like the starting body for this person isn't that big in the first place, because if you're in a position where you're pursuing fat loss but there's less than 10 kilos to lose, you're obviously not a very big body to begin with. And the reason I point this out and say this is because if we think about what I said before, where nutrition targets are based on body size and body weight, if you're already quite small and quite light, your targets are then going to be quite small as well and quite low. And that can make things a fair bit harder. If we think about somebody who's got a fair bit of weight to lose, calculating their deficit based on their current body weight, nutrition targets can be anywhere from like 1900, 2000, in the 2100s, even 2200s. If a person like myself, if I use myself as an example, if my starting body weight is 65 kilos in a fat loss phase and I'm sort of aiming for that like 5 to 10-ish kilo loss, whatever it is, and I'm going to talk about scale weight for these people in a second, but our good friend, the scale weight, obviously. But if we think about myself starting at 65 kilos, if we're calculating nutrition targets based on that, those targets are going to be quite low. My deficit is not going to be 2,000 calories. It's going to be more like 1,600. And I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to this. And I've worked with so many girls whose deficit can be anywhere around like 14, 15, 1,600. That's obviously a fair bit harder to stick to every day than a deficit of 2,200 calories. And I'm not saying that the people whose deficit is 2,000 calories is easier. Like obviously you're still working hard and all of the things. I definitely don't want to discredit that. But we want to acknowledge that it's going to be fairly hard for a person to then diet on like 500 calories less than that a day. So I hope that made sense. But if you're someone who can relate to this, if you know, I reckon like if you're in this position, I'm already quite lean, I'm quite light. When I calculate my nutrition targets, they are down around that 1,600 mark. That's fucking harder to stick to than 2,000. Like we just know this to be true. That's a fact. So what I'm getting at here is if we're in this position, we don't want to do that for majority of the year. If we think about the people that I said before that want to settle into that for the year because they're going to chip away at quite a big goal. If you're someone who doesn't have a lot of weight to lose and is working on a fat loss goal, and in order to do that, you need to be on like 1,500 or 1,600 calories, you don't want to settle into that for the year because we know it's going to be quite hard. It's quite aggressive. There's going to be hunger, cravings. You're probably going to have to say no to some things. Like, again, if you know, when you're in that deficit, you are working hard. You don't want to prolong that and drag that out for majority of the year if you don't have to. So my advice for these people, I know I just went in so many directions there, but bringing it back, advice for these people, I would say, is to find a window of anywhere from like say 8 to 16 weeks, give or take, where your lifestyle and your schedule and everything makes sense for you to actually implement a fairly strict calorie deficit. And what I mean there is if we think about that person needing to knuckle down, go kind of like fairly low calorie, need to stick to that pretty strictly, pretty intensely for 8 to 10 weeks, you don't want to set that up over a time where you're going to Europe for 4 weeks. Like it actually just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. So if you're in this position, really think about everything I just said. If you're already in a healthy weight range and you've got a fat loss goal, you don't want to drag that goal across a whole year. You want to pick a window where you can really knuckle down, get it done, get the result you want, and then get out of the deficit. I don't want to go too far off topic today, but we know there's so many physical benefits to coming out of a calorie deficit, especially for a person who does not have excess body weight and body fat that they need to stay in a deficit to lose. If you're already in a healthy weight range, you do not want to sit in an energy deficit for any longer than you need to. Like that is a fact. And if you don't really understand that, I would just go back and binge the podcast. You'll definitely learn a lot on that topic if you go through all the episodes, but really important to clock that. And so I would just pick a time frame where you can be like, yep, this is when I'm going to knuckle down. This is when I'm going to get it done, and go for that. So then for the girls in this position, I would advise nailing like 8 to 10 weeks in that deficit and then assessing everything, including pictures, weight, and measurements. And if you have achieved your fat loss goal, not your weight loss goal, but your fat loss goal, then look at moving to maintenance. If you haven't, then obviously we can extend that deficit. And I'm going to talk about that more a little bit in a second. But coming back to that point, if you have achieved your fat loss goal, not your weight loss goal. It is so important. If you do not need to lose more than 10 kilos to be in a healthy weight range, if you're already close to that healthy weight range and you're more so dieting for like body composition and just like shredding that last little bit of fat loss or getting a little bit of fat loss after a muscle gain phase or anything like that, even if you're just someone who's always been like close to your sort of goal body, but you want to just drop a little bit of body fat, it is so important to be mindful that you have a fat loss goal, not a weight loss goal. And we did a whole episode on scale weight. If you're in Eat Like Ruby, we talk about scale weight all the time. But it's just so important in this position because there's simply not enough weight for people in this position to lose. So if you are only focusing on weight, you're going to be disappointed because it's not going to just be dropping and chipping away and watching that fly off for 8 to 16 weeks or however long you're doing, because you just don't have it there to lose. And really, like we've spoken about so many times on the podcast and I speak about everywhere, the goal is not to weigh a certain number. The goal is to look and feel a certain way. For people in this position especially, you really need to tap into what that is, even for the people with more weight to lose. But if we think about those people for a second who actually need to lose weight to be in a healthy weight range, it actually makes sense for them to have a quote weight loss goal, because we know that they actually need to do that to be healthy. It makes a lot of sense. If you're already at a healthy weight, you don't need to have a weight goal, and you definitely don't need to have a weight loss goal because you're already at a healthy weight. So you need to actually think about what your goal is. And that's not to say that you can't want to change your body composition. If we think about, again, when I'm in this position, I probably don't need to lose weight, but I want to drop body fat to look and feel a certain way. I'm not shaming that at all. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but we need to actually be clear on the difference there. The difference between wanting to drop body fat to look and feel a certain way versus needing to lose weight. Two very different things. And it's very important to understand that, especially for the people who do not need to lose weight in this position that I'm currently talking about and side noting really hard with. But this is why we need to factor in measurements and pics as well, because simply watching the scale doesn't actually tell us if we are dropping body fat and looking and feeling any different. And we've spoken about this so many times, I feel like we're all getting deja vu. But super important to just remember that if you don't need to lose weight and you don't have much weight to lose at all, don't only watch weight. It doesn't make sense. Look at the pictures, look at the measurements, look at other things, and actually monitor the fat loss progress so you can actually see, am I achieving the thing that I want to achieve? And then what I was saying, if we've actually monitored those things really intelligently, if we don't know how to monitor those things intelligently, we can join the Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase and she'll teach you exactly how to do it. But if we have monitored those things properly and you realize that you've achieved your goal and you're looking good and you're feeling good and you're ready to move away from fat loss, this could be at any time. This could be at like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12, whatever. But when you know that you're there and you want to maintain, it makes sense to go to maintenance, because if we think about maintenance, it's where we're going to maintain. And if we've achieved the physique that we want to achieve, then we want to maintain it. That actually just makes so much sense. If we have not reached it yet, if you think like, oh, yep, I've got a little bit to go, I want to keep pushing fat loss, this is where we could also look at factoring in diet breaks. It's a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A bit more of a necessity, if you will, for a person in this position to factor in a diet break. Like I said, I'm not going to explain today what diet breaks are and how and when and all of the things. This is literally what we teach in Eat Like Ruby. But if you're in this position where you don't need to lose weight and there's not a huge amount of body fat to lose, but we are chipping away and trying to really lean up the physique, like I said, that's awesome. I'm all for it. But a diet break is brought in to relieve some of the stress of dieting. When there's not a lot of body fat to lose, dieting is more stressful for that body. If we think about in really simple terms, if a person has quite a large amount of weight to lose and a fair bit of body fat to lose, going into a calorie deficit and an energy deficit, we are intentionally giving that body less calories and less energy, obviously. And then the body essentially goes, well, that's fine because I've got a lot in storage. If we think about everything we know about fat loss, body fat is stored energy. When we don't give the body enough energy, aka enough food, it pulls from storage. And that's how we lose fat and how we drop body fat. If a person has a fair bit, when we give the body less food, it's like, yeah, well, no worries, I've got plenty in storage. If a person is already very lean and light and then we're in an energy deficit, we're not giving it much energy and it doesn't have much in storage either. That's a stressful time for the body, because if we think about doing that to an extreme, and I always want to touch on this with respect, but when we do that to extreme, that's where we experience like famine, starvation, eating disorders, people being underweight, all of these things. If you think about being in any of those positions, that's stressful for the body. So the body doesn't want to go into that position. So what I'm getting at here, I hope you're still with me, but what I'm getting at here is when we're already lean and light and the body doesn't need to drop body fat, putting it in a position where you're asking it to do so is stressful and it's very demanding on the body. If we're in this position, we want to factor in diet breaks to relieve some of that stress on the body. So that is just something that I would consider if you're in this position and you have been chipping away, you do the assessment, you realize you still want to keep chipping away a little bit more, I would definitely consider a diet break for all those reasons I just said. And if you still don't understand them, join Eat Like Ruby. And then the last sort of category I want to speak to today, it's kind of a 2-in-1. I don't want to sit here and fully cover the muscle gain girls and the girls that want to gain weight, because I feel like we have spoken about that a lot in recent weeks. We'll probably talk about it more at some point because that's obviously what I'm doing right now. But the other sort of thing I want to speak to, and it kind of ties in with that, is the girls who want to kind of maintain weight but tone up, improve the look, improve the shape of their physique. If you have not, definitely go back and listen to the toning episode we did. It's probably about 4 weeks ago now. It was like mid-March. This is an absolute must listen, I think, to any person who wants to improve their physique, change their shape, build their shape, grow their glutes, tone their stomach, tone their arms, tone their legs, any of these things. If you are working towards toning or being more toned, being leaner, anything like that, you need to listen to the toning episode. It's an absolute must. It's almost homework. I'm going to give you guys homework. Go and listen to that. But if you haven't, we'll kind of touch on a little bit of it here. But if we're in a position where we're healthy weight range, we don't really need to drop a lot of body fat, but we do want to keep like improving our physique, which again can be super positive. A lot of people hear that and go, oh, well, if you don't need to, like, why do you always have to have body composition goals and all these things? I think if the mindset is good and we're motivated and we're excited and we love training and we love nutrition and we want to keep progressing, this is a big fuck yes from me. So everyone else can fuck off. But what we're going to talk about here, or what we want to explain here, is if we do have that goal of toning, really a toned physique, like we've spoken about in that episode, is a physique with a certain amount of muscle mass on it and then a low enough body fat level to reveal that muscle. So if you're in this position where you're pretty close to your like desired body fat level, weight range, all of those things, but you want to tone up, we need to factor in some muscle gain at some point. This can be like going into an actual surplus muscle gaining phase, like a big dog phase, like I am, getting after it. But even if we don't love the idea of that and we don't want to really go hard in a gaining phase, we just want to make sure we come out of the deficit. We're eating at maintenance. So we're giving the body enough energy to train well and lift well and not spin our wheels or hang around in that low energy state. Like I said before, if a person doesn't have a lot of weight to lose, we don't want to spend a whole year eating in an energy deficit. If we think about everything I've just spoken about today and what we speak about every week, an energy deficit is literally like intentionally giving the body less energy than it needs. If we think about a person who wants to tone up, and we know that toning is achieved with building muscle and having enough muscle mass on the frame, we're not going to lift well and train well in an energy deficit to actually build that muscle and create that shape and all of the things. So I hope all of that made sense and it all really ties in. But so often we can see people who don't need to lose weight, don't really need to drop body fat, don't really want to drop body fat, and do want to achieve a toned physique, continue to hang around on low calories because they don't really understand all of this stuff. And then they just sort of think, well, I want to be lean and toned, so I need to, like, quote, eat good, be good, eat well, and not really understand that eating well and eating good for fat loss and eating well and eating good for building shape and creating a toned physique are actually really different things. If you don't understand that, I would absolutely binge the Eat Like Ruby podcast, join an Eat Like Ruby program, whatever you need to do to really understand that concept. But it's so important for a person in this position to clock. If you do not need to drop weight or don't want to drop body fat, are you still eating in a way that you would be if those were your goals? And that's actually super important to clock, because I think that's very common. And I think it's just a lack of understanding of what is required for the actual goal that you have. And the last little thing I'll say on that topic, and for these people in this toning up position, is often people will sort of say, like, can I still get a toned physique if I don't do a muscle gain phase? And how long do I have to be in a muscle gain phase? How long do I have to be in a surplus? If we really think about the facts and what we know to be true here, we know that like the more muscle we can put on the frame, the more toned it's going to look. We know that the more time we can spend in a muscle gain phase, the more muscle we're going to put on the frame, and therefore the more toned it's going to look. So there's no right or wrong with these questions, but what it really comes down to is the longer we spend in it, the better, and the harder we go in it to a certain extent, the better. So I hope that made sense. And we're going to do some Q&A episodes in the coming weeks. So if you've got questions about this stuff, it'll be a perfect time. You can send those in and we can keep talking about it. But it's really important. I think people want to like play it as safe as they can. Like, how long do I have to spend there and how hard do I have to go? It's like anything in life. The longer we go into it and the harder we go with it, like I said, within reason, the better result we're going to get. So it's completely up to the individual of how hard they want to go and how long they want to sit in that phase and whatever. But it's just really important to understand that if you're someone who's like tiptoeing around it and is like, oh, do I really have to do that? It's like, you don't have to do anything. We've said this a million times, but if you want the most optimal result, here's what I would do. I would absolutely dedicate 4 to 5 months, if not more, to getting out of a deficit, ideally into a little bit of a surplus, making sure you have a really structured progressive training program in place and just making that your absolute focus for those months during winter, whatever time frame you choose. And then like we said, obviously the longer the better, but I'm also mindful that we're still human beings. Most of us are females that are listening to this. We come into summer, we don't want to be in a gaining phase, we want to be a little bit shredded. And that's why I think it can be really good timing to line up the muscle gain and work on that aspect of the toning through winter. And then most people want to do a bit of a fat loss phase on the other side of that. And that even ties in with my initial comment and that thing that I was calling myself out on of saying like a fat loss phase should be very short, sharp, direct, effective. All those things I've been saying a million times. If we think about a person, if you're sitting there right now in a healthy weight range, not really needing to drop body fat, if you were to go into a gaining phase, like a slight surplus and really focus on training for the next 4 to 5 months, let's say April, May, June, July, August, 5 months, if you had put on maybe 5 to 6 kilos, if we think about the episode I did with my mum, I think she said she'd put on 6 kilos. If you then come out the other side of that and go, okay, cool, I've built a bit of muscle, I've built my physique a bit, I want to drop a little bit of body fat coming into summer, that's where we want to knuckle down. A person in that position, like I said before, is going to have to go somewhat low calorie because they're not a huge body, they're not a huge physique. So to diet down for fat loss, the calories are going to be a little bit lower. We don't want to spend all year on those. We don't want to drag that out. See how everything's starting to tie in together. I would tee up a fat loss phase for around that 8 to 12 week mark, give or take. Through the months after the gaining phase, if we were to look at like September, October, maybe November is when we start to assess and move out of that into maintenance. That timing can just line up so well. And I've been speaking about that timing for months on the podcast, for years. Like we've spoken about that since day one of the pod. And that's why I kind of wanted to do this episode today, to point out that timing and that structure can work really well for certain girls. And then also considering the girls that are in a bit of a different position when there's more weight to lose, etc., to structure things a little bit differently. So I feel like that's probably a good place to wrap up. I feel like that was another kind of info overload episode, but I hope that it helped clear a few things up and just help people see where you're personally at and where you can go over the coming weeks and months. Obviously, like I said, we have the Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase and the muscle gain phase, both starting on April 22nd. The muscle gain phase is 20 weeks. So I did a few episodes where we said that it was 18 weeks and I just wasn't loving it. I just wasn't loving that vibe. When I looked at our plans, our structure, our calendar, everything, I was like, No, let's make it 20. So those girls are going 20 weeks. We're also running 2 fat loss phases alongside that. So on April 22nd, we will start a 20-week muscle gain phase. We'll start a 10-week fat loss phase. At the halfway point, which I think is July 1st, we'll start another fat loss phase for 10 weeks while the muscle gain girls are in the back half of the muscle gain phase. And then we will run one more Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase for 10 weeks after that. So we literally have 3 more fat loss phases running in Eat Like Ruby. We're pretty much in a continuous fat loss phase, like starting every 10 weeks, April, July, and then it's either like, I think it's start of September is the final one. And the muscle gain girls literally will have that option to like come out of their 20 weeks and then start a 10-week fat loss phase if they want to. Obviously, we don't have to. We'll talk about that with them when they get there. But we've lined it up very intentionally that people can sort of come in and out of things as they want to, because that is what I love. That is what I want people to have access and availability to in Eat Like Ruby. And the other little thing to note, guys, is if you're in the current fat loss phase or if you're coming into the next one, first of all, that's super exciting, but we do run what we call the alum price for the fat loss phase. And if you don't know what alum means, I think Georgia asked what alum means. It's like a graduate. So like if you've done the fat loss phase once, you're kind of like a fat loss phase graduate. We have like a special price for you at all times. And what I mean there is if you've done the fat loss phase, you can re-enter any future rounds at that special price, because obviously we're going to cover some things that you might have already learnt, but we do like new training programs, new meal plans, all of those things. So there's definitely benefits to coming back in. Obviously we do the live calls where I just talk about a million different things. So we're super mindful that some girls have that goal for most of the year, and we want you guys to have access to the fat loss phase as easily as you can to stay in if that is your goal and that really suits you. So just know that if you ever do a round and you come into the fat loss phase, you've got access to future rounds at a fairly discounted price. It's pretty cool. And it just creates that, like I said, that availability that I want for people to kind of move in and out of any phase or any goal as it suits them. So if that suits you, you want to join the next fat loss phase, you've probably got like a week left to do so. If you want to join the muscle gain phase, you've probably got not long at all to do so, because we'll be really filling those spots because it is application only. So you can join those, apply for those, all the things. But either way, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, give it a thumbs up, give it a 5-star, whatever it is, wherever you listen. Reshare it on your stories, tag me, tag Eat Like Ruby. I always love to see that you guys are listening and that you're picking up what I'm putting down. And then, like I said, we're going to do some Q&A episodes in the coming weeks. So definitely keep your eye out for the Q&A box where you can submit those. I think those are such beneficial episodes. We haven't done one for ages. So stay tuned for that, guys. But thank you so much for listening today, as always, and I will be back next week.